The end that began without TRSE arrived earlier that Friday, jacket slung over his shoulder, eyes downcast, like someone carrying guilt disguised as fatigue. He dropped his keys on the table with a sharp clink and leaned against the chair without looking at me. I knew, even without words, I knew. "We need to talk," he said, as if it were the first time. But for me, it was the 100th, said only in silence. Now he finally had the courage to speak. The kitchen was filled with the smell of roasted chicken I had prepared since early morning, like every Friday, but that night, it would taste different. He took a deep breath and said it. "I met someone else." There was no hesitation, just cruelty dressed as late honesty. The room went silent. The ticking of the clock seemed to mock me as I absorbed each syllable of that announcement. 40 years of marriage, 40 Christmases, birthdays, medicine runs, wash towels, fights, settled in silence. All of it reduced to "I met someone else." He said it with the calm of someone who hadn't lived any of it. I looked at him. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked, as if seeing a stranger inside my house for the first time. That man in front of me had already left years ago. He just forgot to tell me. "I don't want to fight. I'll leave. The house, the car, the savings. You deserve it," he said, trying to sound fair. But fairness is when both sides are heard, and he only listened to himself. I no longer wanted fairness. I wanted truth, but not his mind, and mine was screaming inside. It was about time. As he spoke, I thought about Francis, my lawyer, and the years I'd spent preparing my silent escape. I smiled inside because he thought he was leaving with the power. Little did he know, I had left long before him. I made coffee, poured it into the blue cup he liked, like a symbolic farewell ritual. He sipped in silence. So did I, but while he swallowed coffee, I swallowed the victory of someone who waited for the right moment. He asked if I wanted to say anything. I shook my head. Not now. Then I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and cried, but not out of pain, out of relief, out of liberation. It was like stepping out of an invisible prison, and he had no idea. While he slept on the sofa for the last time, I opened my personal safe hidden behind old books. I took out a folder with documents, records, investments, and the deed to a country house he never knew existed. It was all there. The new Helen, ready with plans, land, accounts in my name, and peace in her eyes. I closed the folder, took a deep breath, and leaned against the wall like someone resting after running a marathon. It was the first night of my new life and I slept in peace, even with a traitor under the same roof. ***, the years I read there was a time when I dreamed of breakfast flowers, pillow notes, and sunset walks. But those gestures were slowly replaced by silence, harsh routines, and practical words. He called me his rock, but never noticed that even pillars crack from within. I cared for the house, the children, his health, the taxes, the electricity bill, his sick mother. And in the middle of it all, who took care of me? No one. Not even myself. I became an expert at forgetting myself, spent decades erasing my needs to keep the structure upright. Wore what he liked, cooked what he preferred, smiled at guests I couldn't stand. I became the ideal woman for everyone except me. Even my reading habits faded. He'd say silly romance novels took up shelf space. Bit by bit, I lost my reflection in the mirror. All that remained was the shadow of the perfect wife. It was the forgotten birthdays that began to wake me up. Year after year, he showed up with last-minute gifts, a cooking pan, an unsigned card, a wilted rose, but I'd fake surprise, put on a new dress, and smile for the photos. Inside, every smile turned into a scar, and I learned to fake it so well even God might have thought I was happy. It was on a gray afternoon that everything began to change. It was raining, and I went to the bakery for fresh bread. On the way back, I saw a flyer for a talk, starting over after 60. Yes, you can. I walked in on impulse, sat in the last chair, hidden, small, but every word I heard felt like it was spoken just for me. The speaker was a glowing widow. She said the end of an era wasn't the end of life. That women grow old to bloom, not to wilt. She spoke of autonomy, investments, freedom. And in that moment, I wasn't in a bakery, was being reborn. I left with her business card and a new fire burning inside. The next morning, I began waking up earlier. I told him I was going for health walks. But in truth, I was heading downtown, where a woman named Laura was teaching me about financial independence. I opened my first account in my own name. Laura helped me plan investments, diversify funds, and protect my future. For the first time, something was mine alone, and it was addictive. When he asked where I'd been, I'd say at the market or walking with a friend. He never suspected a thing, because he never imagined I could do anything like that. To him, I was predictable, obedient, permanent, but he didn't know a new woman was growing inside me, built from old fragments, and that woman no longer accepted crumbs of love or excuses dressed as care. The plan he never SAWIT was through Laura that I met Francis, an experienced, calm, and discreet lawyer. He listened to me for almost 2 hours without interrupting, taking notes on everything. When I finished, he said, "You're more prepared than you think." Together, we created a hidden inventory of the family's assets, legally separating what was mine by right and what would be mine by justice. Began transferring small amounts into a stable investment fund in my name, switched the joint account for an individual one, bought bonds and even part of a plot of land in the countryside. Each signature was a silent scream of freedom. I never took anything that belonged to him. I only secured what was rightfully mine, but he, in his arrogance, never suspected a thing. While he slept in front of the TV, I was reading about real estate funds. While he said women don't understand money, I was diversifying stocks, and every move I made was calculated, cold, emotionless, just like he had been with me for years. I became a strategist, firm, practical, and I started liking the woman I saw growing inside me. I bought new clothes, simple but elegant, let my gray hair show its natural beauty. Started walking with more posture, more firmness. The neighbors would comment that I looked renewed. I'd smile and say, "I'm becoming the woman I never was." And that was nothing but the pure truth. I began saving old letters, old journals, and proof of years of emotional neglect, not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew the future might require evidence. Francis filed everything with precision. "You're protected," he'd say. But I wasn't just seeking protection, I was seeking closure with dignity. On the days he went out to meet his mistress, though he never admitted it, I was organizing my future. With every step he took toward her, I took 3 away from him. I took online courses on finance, inheritance law, and even gardening, because I wanted to plant something new, both literally and symbolically. And every flower that would bloom in my backyard would be born from my transformed pain. I didn't tell my children anything. They had their own lives, their own kids, their own challenges. I didn't want to drag them into a dying marriage, but I left everything documented, recorded, signed, a legacy of the truth. So if one day they asked why, I would have something to show them, because sometimes freedom also needs witnesses. The house wasn't his ANY the morning after he confessed the affair. He left to clear his head. Maybe he thought I would beg, cry, try to stop him from going, but I simply said, "Take a jacket, it's going to get cold." And I went back to the kitchen as if nothing had happened. In truth, I was just waiting for him to leave, so I could begin the second phase of my plan. I went to the document cabinet and rearranged everything. The old folders gave way to new ones, titles, in my name, records of acquired assets. I called Francis and scheduled a meeting. He said, "It's time, isn't it?" I replied, "Yes." Since he walked out willingly, I'll seal this door with the end he chose. And that very day, we began the real division process. The house he claimed he would leave as a gift had actually been registered in my name for 3 years. He just never noticed, because he never cared enough to check. The car had also already been sold by me and replaced with a simpler, more economical one. And the so-called family savings had become part of a fund in my name. His gift was just an empty box. I had already given myself a future. With him gone, I breathed air free of fear, control, and tension for the first time. I took all his photos out of the frames, stored them in a box, not out of anger, but emotional cleansing. I redid the living room, changed the curtains, bought colorful pillows, hung paintings I had always wanted. It was as if I could finally open the windows of my soul. And the sun came back into the house. With him out of it, I cooked for myself. For the first time in decades, made salmon with vegetables, not to impress anyone, just because I wanted to. I set the table with my favorite plate, a glass of wine, and a candle. I sat in silence and celebrated, because that dinner was, symbolically, my rebirth. In the days that followed, he sent strange messages, some sweet, others cold. He said he needed to put things in order before leaving for good, but he didn't know everything was already in order. My order. He scheduled a meeting, wanted to negotiate. I agreed, with a set time and documents in hand. He arrived, looking tired and confused, looked around the transformed house and seemed lost. You've already changed everything, he asked. Yes, and not just the furniture. He understood, but didn't want to accept it, because men like him prefer to believe they still have control. The man who didn't know how to lose. He sat in the old armchair, the same one where he spent years ignoring my silences. This time, he was the one speechless, swallowing hard in the face of a new reality. You don't seem shaken, he said, looking for a familiar reaction. But the woman in front of him was no longer predictable. I'm only shaken by things that still have power over me. And you lost that long ago. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out broken. What do you want, Helen? Money. The house. I want my peace. And the freedom you thought you could give me only now. I showed him the documents, each paper a verdict that disarmed him. He turned pale, unable to understand how he had lost before the game even began. You planned all this? He asked, somewhere between offended and stunned. I prepared myself. You planned the abandonment, day after day. I just learned how to respond. His male pride couldn't handle the idea of being defeated by silence and strategy. He expected drama, not composure, and faced with my calm, he fell apart. What about the kids? Are you going to drag them into this war? They're not in a war. They're living. They don't deserve to carry your choices. He looked at me as if seeing another woman, and in truth, it was another who stood before him. One who had suffered in silence, but now spoke without fear. One who had traded fear for purpose. We stood face to face, locked in a silent standoff. He wanted to turn back time, as if regret could erase years of neglect. But I had learned that forgiveness isn't a return, and that self-love isn't selfishness, it's survival. The woman who loved him was gone, and the one who remained only wanted to move forward. He stood up slowly, hesitating, as if waiting for me to ask him to stay. But I simply said, "Close the door on your way out." And he left. For the first time, without slamming it, without yelling, without trying to dominate, the house fell into silence. But it was a light, breathable silence. A silence that wasn't waiting for him to come back. That night, I slept deeply without pills, without spiraling thoughts. The pillow felt softer, as if his absence were a gift, and sleep came like a hug, the kind you give to yourself. Because when you choose yourself, everything changes. Even the way you dream. The day he came back asking for help a week later, he showed up unannounced. He looked worn down, with an unshaved beard and hollow eyes. I have nowhere to go, he said, like a child asking for shelter. I didn't humiliate him. I just opened the door and said, "Sit down. Let's talk like two adults." He asked for a glass of water, and I served it like I did for years. But this time, there was dignity in me, and shame in him. He said the mistress left him, that he couldn't afford the new rent, that his friends had distanced themselves, even his own children were cold. He spoke of regret, like someone who realized he lost something precious too late. I was wrong, Helen. I was stupid. You were always my foundation. And for the first time, I listened without feeling responsible for his pain. I didn't cry. I didn't hug him. I didn't offer comfort. I just said, I understand your regret, but that's not a return ticket. He went silent, lowered his head. He was facing someone who no longer belonged to him. And that pain was written in every crease of his tired face. I offered him a snack. He ate in silence, a stranger visiting his own history. You're really going to leave me like this? He asked, his voice cracking. I stopped abandoning myself. That means keeping away those who didn't know how to love me. I explained that he could start over, just not with me. That life gives second chances, but not always with the same people. And that I had finally learned how to live without emotional dependency. He left without a fight, without curses, without drama. That was his most painful defeat, realizing I had survived better than he imagined. I closed the door slowly, with a light sigh, not of pity, but of closure. It was the end of the last thread still tying me to him, and the true beginning of my emotional freedom. That night, I sat in the garden with a glass of wine. I looked at the sky and gave thanks, not to him, but to the courage awakened in me, the moon seemed to smile, an accomplice to my quiet journey. I thought about everything I had overcome in silence and who I was becoming. And I felt something I hadn't in years, pride in myself. The next day I wrote everything in a new notebook, with blank pages and a golden cover. It was the diary of my new life. The title, The Woman He Never Knew. There, I began recording memories, not of pain, but of resilience. Each word was a scar redefined. Each line, a firm step on the ground that now belonged to me. A woman who became SEI in months went by, and the house became a sanctuary of peace and discovery. I developed the habit of writing every morning, even before coffee. My words flowed like a river that had been dammed for years. And without realizing it, my journal turned into a book about starting over after 60. I sent it to a small local publisher, and 2 months later, I got the answer. It would be published. The news made me cry like I hadn't in years, but this time, from joy. The cover was delicate, in earthy tones, with my name in soft lettering. My book became popular among women of all ages, who saw themselves in the lines of my pain. I started getting invited to meetings, talks, women's circles. For the first time, my voice was being heard, not interrupted. One day, a young woman approached me after an event. She said, "My mom is going through exactly what you went through. Can I give her your book?" I held her hands and said, "Take it, and tell her she's still alive. That's all that matters." I never imagined my scars would become maps for other women, but in that moment, I understood. I didn't suffer in vain. I turned pain into a bridge. My oldest grandson came to visit. He was 15, with curious eyes. "Grandma, Dad says you became famous," he said, smiling. I explained that fame wasn't what I was looking for. I just wanted to truly exist before leaving this world. He hugged me and said, "You're the strongest person I know." To be called strong again, but this time with admiration, not pressure, was transformative. Before, being strong meant enduring. Now, it meant knowing when to let go. My family began to look at me differently, as if discovering me for the first time, and I held no bitterness, only gratitude for the time I still had left, because it's never too late to bloom. A local journalist wanted to do a story on me. In the interview, he asked, "Did you forgive your ex-husband?" I paused for a few seconds before answering, "I did, but that doesn't mean he came back. It means I moved on." And I really had. New resentment, no chains, hands free. Sometimes I saw him from afar at the market. Older, more hunched. He would look, lower his eyes, and walk on. He never tried to reach out again, maybe out of respect, maybe out of shame, but I no longer expected anything from him. Everything I needed, I had already found. In myself. The life he never saw below. The publication of the book opened doors I never imagined walking through. I was invited to speak at an international conference on female reinvention and maturity. I traveled to Italy, something I had always dreamed of, but he called soap opera nonsense. I walked the streets of Florence, sipped wine watching the sunset in Tuscany, and I smiled to myself, because it was a dream lived only by me, by my new version. There, I met women who had also broken free from suffocating relationships. Each had her own scars, her mourning, her rebirth. We talked like soul sisters, united by different pains and silent victories. I realized there's an invisible army of women blooming late, but with power, and I felt part of something greater, as if my story had found its place in the world. On a cold night, I wrote my second book, The Silence That Saved Me. It was more intimate, deeper, about sleepless nights and the fear of starting alone, but also about the power that's born when you discover who you are outside the shadows. The publisher loved it, said it was even more mature, more necessary, and for the first time, I received an advance, earned solely with my name. I bought a smaller, cozy house in a leafy neighborhood with a garden in the back. There I planted lavender, mint, and white roses, my childhood favorites. The morning scent of the garden reminded me of being a girl when everything was still a dream. Now, dreams had space again, shape and fragrance. The woman, they said, was too old to start over, was blooming once more. I began giving volunteer classes to recently separated women at a community center. I told my story not as drama, but as possibility. Many cried, others laughed, but all left with something new inside them. A flame maybe. A desire to choose themselves, and that gave me more joy than any formal recognition. I received a letter from an 82-year-old lady. She wrote, "Your words gave me the courage to leave the man who made me feel invisible." And at the end, she added, "It's never too late, right?" I cried reading that, because no, it's never too late. And now, that had become my mission, to remind others of that. On the wall of my new bedroom, I hung a large mirror, something I never had before. Every day, I look at myself slowly, with respect, with love. I don't seek youth, I seek presence. The woman reflected there has no fear, no rush. She has won, and she's still writing the rest of her story. Asterisk, asterisk, the last CAL1 afternoon, the phone rang. It was a number I recognized but never expected to see again. I answered calmly. On the other end, his voice was weak, choked. "Helen, can I talk to you?" The silence that followed was heavy, but I allowed it. "Of course, what do you need?" He was sick, cancer, advanced stage. There was no one left by his side. The woman he ran away with had left him at the hospital. He said he needed to confess, to ask for forgiveness. Not for what happened in the end, but for what never happened along the way. "I never really saw you. Only now I realize what I lost." I took a deep breath. I heard his voice, but felt no pain, no resentment. "You're only seeing now because you're finally looking. And I'm grateful for that," he cried. Asked me to visit. I took a few days to consider, not for revenge, but out of respect for myself. Then I decided to go. Not for him, for me. The hospital was cold, but his room was quiet. He smiled when he saw me, eyes misty, fragile. "You look beautiful," he said. "You became everything I never knew how to love." I held his hand for a few minutes. There was no anger, no love, just a bond laid to rest. "You've been all of this with me, Helen." But I was blind. We sat in silence, and in that silence, I truly forgave him. Not with words, but with presence. He asked me to take a letter to our children. Tell them I regret it. Tell them their mother is the strongest woman I've ever known. I promised I would. And I did. He passed away 2 days later. The news came without pain, like a leaf falling in autumn. I didn't attend the funeral. I sent white flowers, the ones he never gave me. I asked them to read an excerpt from my book at the service. It read, "To forgive is not to forget, it is to move forward, unburdened." And that's what I did. I moved forward, light, unafraid. That night, I wrote the final chapter of my third book. Title, All That Remained in Me. And as I placed the period, I closed not just the story, but an entire life of silence. It was time to live new chapters, real, free, mine, and sleep with a whole heart. Her, finally, for HERSLF today. When I wake up and hear the silence in my house, I don't feel lonely, I feel peace. The peace of someone who owes nothing to anyone, not even to herself. I rise early, make my coffee, tend to my plants, and write. My life now is made of choices, and every one of them is mine. I choose lightness, self-love, and the freedom to be exactly who I am. People ask me if I still believe in love. The answer is yes, but not a love that demands erasure, waiting, or pain. I believe in a love that adds, that respects, that walks beside without chaining your steps. If it comes one day, it'll be welcome. But if it doesn't, I won't miss it, because I've learned how to be enough. Some friends say, "You should turn your story into a movie." And I smile, because this story is already a film, only lived from the inside, with a powerful script, a real character, and a redemptive ending. No princes, just the heroine. And at last, she won. My photos now shine with a spark in my eyes, not because someone loves me, but because I love myself. I wear lipstick he thought was too much. I paint my nails red. I dance alone in the living room on rainy nights. I no longer need to fit into anyone else's frame. Now, I live in full expansion. Sometimes I get letters from women saying they left an abusive relationship after hearing me. They write, "You saved me." And I answer, "No, you saved yourself. I was just the mirror." Because that's what my story became. A reflection of possibility. A voice for those who never dared to speak. Life didn't return the time I lost, but it gave me the sacred gift of now. And I treat the present as my holy place. Starting over at 60 was an act of courage, but living fully at 65 is an act of love, and that love, finally, is mine. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share, and comment below. I choose my freedom. Because many more emotional stories are coming. And next time, we'll meet a woman who kept a secret for 30 years and only on her deathbed revealed the truth that changed her family's fate. See you there.